So now let's talk about bin scopes. Now I haven't discussed with you about bin scopes when we were talking about Spring Core module, because there are 6 bin scopes and 4 of them are web related. So I waited till you dive deep into this web module so we can understand all these bin scopes. Now I will tell you right from the start that the most common ones which are being used is the one which is in the core module, so only 2. But I will also just tell you the other 4 so you can just know about this. So I'm just going to delete this so you can have it. So the first bin scope and the one which is the default one is called singleton. So singleton, if you are familiar with the singleton package, I have a typo here. Basically it means one instance in the entire application. Now when we are talking about Spring, it's a one instance in the entire application context. So I'm just going to go here in person service and I'm going to add another person service object. So person service 2. Now I'm going to add this into my constructor, and here I'm just going to log my person service 1. I'm just going to log it my person service 1 object, and I'm just going to log my second person service 2 is person service 2. Like this. So you see here we have 2 different objects which are being added automatically by Spring context based on our service annotation here. So I'm going to restart the application, and now I'm going to call my getPeoples endpoint, and you see here I have person service 1 and person service 2 which I'm logging here, and it's the same object stored in memory. Why is that? Because by default the scope of the bin is singleton, so one instance per the entire application context. Now you can explicitly configure using the scope and put value, and you can put configurable bin factory scope singleton, but it's basically the same behavior because this is being automatically added by Spring. And if we pay close attention to person service imupl, and we find here, you see it has identified this component class, and here it says creating shared instance of singleton bin. So this is being the default behavior by Spring, so you don't have to manually add this. Now the next one which I want to talk to you about is the prototype scope. So basically the prototype scope is the opposite of the singleton. So it's one instance whenever you are every time you are creating a new object, it's a different instance in memory. So we can put here like prototype, it's every object is a new instance. So I'm just going to restart this, and here I can also person service imupl, and you see now it's not a creating share instance, it's not logging anymore creating share instance because it's not being added by default because I have manually configured it to be a scope prototype. Now if I go, let me go here, if I go here and call this again, you will see right now there are 2 different objects in memory here, although it's the same service, because based on my scope, now it's every time you add a new dependency or a new object is a new object in memory. So like the default value which you add normally objects in Java but not in Spring. So these are the most 2 common ones which you'll use. Now the next one are only web related. So if you don't add the Spring dependency web module, you can't use them. But since we have added, I'm going to show you about this one. So the next one is the request scope. So every a new object, every new request. So to do this, we can do to person service imupl, so we can add this request scope, which basically will transform my bin in a request scope bin. So I'm just going to restart this, and now I'm just going to call my get method. Now you see here I have the same object, although it's 2 different objects because it's the same request. Now if I click on it again, you see here now it's a different object because it's a new request which is being fired in my endpoint, and this is called a request scope bin. So every time you have a new request, you have a different new object. Now the next one is session. It's a new object every new session. New session. So basically every new session is something that when you close your browser and restart it again, in a nutshell. So now let me just go here. You will see I have the same object. And now if I go here, because I have the same session, okay, I have a different session. I forgot to add this here. So session scope. I knew something was wrong. Because I have the same session in Postman. Okay, so now you see I have the same object. And now you see I have the same object. Why is that? Although there are two different requests, it's the same session which is being fired. Now I'm going to go to Google, not Google, to my browser, and I'm just going to call the same endpoint, but in my browser, so it's a different session. And now if you pay close attention, you will see it's a different object from here, because it's a new session, and based on this session scope, Spring has created two different objects for me here. So this is called a session scope. Now the next one is called the application scope, and it's the same object in my entire application, but in my entire application on the life cycle of my servlet. Now I'm not going to go into details because you will very rarely use this, but I just wanted to tell you that this exists. So you can just go here and put application scope, and basically this is the same behavior as the default one, the singleton approach. So you see here the same object. Now if I go to Postman, it will be the same object. So this is basically the same behavior as the default one, singleton scope, but this also works for different application contexts, but when you have the same servlet container. Now I won't go into details because this is a very rare use case where we'll use this, and this is the next one, which is the WebSocket scope, and it's the same object per WebSocket. Now this also is very rare. It's very rare because it involves web sockets, and we haven't discussed this. I don't think we will discuss this in this course, but I just wanted to tell you in theory. Why is that? Because if you are going to want to apply as a Java and Spring developer, these are one of the questions which you can be asked on the interview. So it's good to just know them in theory, because this is the one that they care about. But if you know all the 6 ones, obviously you have a plus in their eyes. So these are all the scopes of bins which you can have in a Spring application.